all human life stems from the ocean, and to date, all human life depends on the ocean. The ocean provides us with the oxygen we breathe, it regulates our climate, it absorbs carbon from the air, it provides us with protein, it provides us with shipping lanes. It is an immense economical factor. At the same time, the oceans are under immense stress. We know very little about the oceans as a broad society. I discuss with Dr. Tom Pickerel, a marine biologist and the leader of the Global Oceans Program of the World Resources Institute, what a sustainable blue economy could look like.
Money is not necessarily the problem. Getting that initial $1 million or $50,000, that's not actually what's needed. What's needed is that support, the education, and investment.
Let's dive right in. This is Where the Ocean Meets Dr. Tom Pickerel.
Where the Ocean Meets.
You are obviously a marine biologist. If you could create a curriculum that is taught at every school, first of all, how would you convince a principal that ocean literacy is important?
Wow, and I think that's the £64 million question. I think one of the big challenges we have with ocean literacy is that everyone seems to like the ocean. People like going on beach holidays, people like leisure activities. A lot of people eat seafood, but they don't often connect it all together. It's just something that's there. So I think one of the challenges we've got is getting people, whoever they may be, to understand the importance of the ocean, first of all, so how they are reliant on the ocean, and secondly, then go into some of the challenges that are facing the ocean, because that way you've connected them with, yeah, this is important to me, and wow, these are some of the challenges. And so I think that's the way you start that conversation, going to the importance of the value of the ocean to people's everyday lives.
Mm. And maybe we can do that a bit in this conversation. Like, first start off with, if I'm a regular citizen, why should I care about the ocean? Why is it so important to my everyday life?
Yeah, so there's a number of different ways you can sort of look at this, and you can probably take the economy first. That's not necessarily the most important one, but the ocean economy is worth between $1.5–2 trillion a year. That's all the activity that takes place. The industries, the shipping. So it's incredibly valuable. There's about 200 million jobs directly dependent on the ocean, and then there's all the other jobs that come that are linked to it. So if you take the fishing sector, it's not just the fishing that is important. It's the people who count the fish, the scientists, and then it's people who paint the fishing boat, people who make the fishing gear. So it's a whole big cascade as well as these jobs. Then we have sort of the contribution of food as well. For 3 billion people on the planet are reliant on protein from the sea, and pretty much most other people have the option of seafood, and they choose it as well. But it's not just eating it, it's all the roles that come from that, particularly in those communities that may not have many other opportunities. So they're relying on the seafood to feed themselves, but also go into their local economy, the processing sector, exports, for example, so bringing money in. So there's an economic argument as well. And then it's the ocean as sort of a life resource for us. The ocean absorbs something like 90% of the carbon dioxide that we produce through our activities. One of the consequences of that, of course, is that when carbon dioxide is absorbed by seawater, it reacts to form carbonic acid, which is causing the acidification of the oceans. So that's one of the challenges. It also absorbs heat. 25% of the heat that we have produced through our activities are absorbed by the oceans. And if we didn't have that, you can just imagine what the planet would look like. And it's oxygen production as well. 50% of the world's oxygen is produced from activity in the ocean. That doesn't, I mean, you see quotes saying 50% of the oxygen we breathe. That's not true. A lot of that oxygen that's generated is actually used by organisms in the ocean itself. But again, it's incredibly important. And then we have the water cycle, the evaporation of water from the oceans that form clouds, go over land, deposit their water, and that's what fuels our terrestrial water supplies, which are both for drinking and for farming activities. And then there's the leisure activities that I've mentioned previously. There's so much opportunity there, but it's also one of the things we've looked at is the human health benefits of the ocean. It's an emerging area, people trying to actually get some kind of recognition of the health benefits. There's a study that came out that showed that people who live by the sea, and we don't see this result with people who live by lakes or rivers, live longer than people who don't. There's also there's sort of the mindfulness and mental health benefits of seeing waves that's also been recorded. We did a report a couple of years ago on the human health benefits of a healthy ocean, and it was actually captured in some of the findings from the United Nations Ocean Decade Conference that was held in Barcelona. So it really received a good reaction. So there's a number of really important reasons why the ocean is, well, we are dependent on the ocean. So I think that's a really good place to start. And I haven't even talked about some of the solutions that the ocean can bring us for our greatest challenge, which is climate change.
Yeah, so if I look at my notes, we already have quite the curriculum. They could cover weeks of school. So we have the economy, let's call it a sub-thread of fishing and protein. We have oxygen production, water cycle, carbon pump, leisure activities, health. And behind all of these, we have mechanisms that, for example, produce the oxygen or how the carbon is stored. So these are all the benefits that the ocean brings. If we now look at what are the challenges for the ocean, maybe we can cluster these as well to have a bit of an overview, and then we can dive a bit into the different topics.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different threats, but they can be sort of categorized into a couple of key ones. The first one is overfishing. I mean, that has so many different consequences, both sort of economic consequences. It has food security and nutritional security consequences. It has livelihood consequences, particularly for those maybe small island developing states or coastal communities in the global south with not many other opportunities. But it also has ecosystem impacts. You have trophic cascades, it's called. If you remove a predator or a prey through overfishing, then you have unintended consequences that result in the ecosystem changing. So overfishing is one of the key threats we face, and it's something that can be addressed pretty straightforwardly. It's not rocket science. I keep saying it's fishery science. We know what we've got to do. When you manage a fishery well, or even not bad, you see changes and you see an increase. These stocks can rebuild, and there's plenty of examples of that around the world. But if you get it too far down, then they won't rebuild, because you'll have that change in the ecosystem. So that's the first one. The second one that's often quoted is pollution, and I think that is a big threat. But people seem to get sidetracked on plastic pollution. That is a threat. There's not only is there the impact of plastic visually, and the impacts it can have on organisms. You see lots of awful pictures of turtles, for example, and whales and dolphins caught up in plastic waste, particularly fishing gear. But it's also human health impact of these microplastics that are eroded down or go straight into the sea, that can potentially enter the food chain, enter our bodies. And we don't really know what the impacts of that is at the minute. But it's beyond just plastic pollution. It's nutrient runoff from the land. So there's this real link between the land and the sea, and you get sort of fertilizers getting washed off fields, go into the rivers, go into the sea, and that causes algal blooms. So you get big, huge blooms of algae that can be, have human health impacts. They can have commercial impacts, such as shutting down shell fisheries that feed on these algae that actually have toxins in them. And then there's also actual chemical pollution as well, which is damaging the health of the ecosystem, damaging human health. So pollution is another bucket that we should consider. And then the third one, which is probably the most impactful, is climate change. And that can go into a number of different things. I've already mentioned ocean acidification, but there's the economic impacts of warming waters, and that is fish stocks are moving offshore and towards the poles. So if you're in the equator region, your fish is moving to north and or south, depending on where you are. We're even seeing it in the UK, for example, where cod is sort of migrating at a steady pace northwards from the southern North Sea upwards. And, if you're a fisherman based in that particular region, and you have a history and a heritage and a quota for fishing that, then your fish is going. You can't always follow it for practical or legal reasons. So that's a change. And it may be for some countries like us in the UK, new species are coming in and new opportunities. We're seeing bluefin tuna, which is returning back to our waters. There's a big boom of octopus in the southwest of England at the minute. But if you're in the equator region, there's nothing to come in. So that's another consequence.
What's always interesting to me is also how interconnected these topics are, right? It's like, yes, we have overfishing, but then fish stock are also under threat by warming oceans, if I'm not completely wrong. And then at the same time, if fish population expand again and grow again, there's also a massive amount of carbon basically that sits within these animals. Again, I might be wrong, but this is a bit my understanding so far. And then pollution further threatens livestock. So it's basically impossible to point at one thing and say it's like, this is what we need to fix everything. Or am I wrong?
No, I think you're right. I think there's no magic bullet. There's a lot of different things that we need to do, and they are in itself connected as well. Like if you improve fisheries management and you have a healthy, large stock of a particular fish, what you're doing is you're increasing its resilience to climate change impacts as well. And that's, so it's a double benefit, both for the fishery, but also for the species itself. If you have these protected areas as well, if you have these healthy stocks, they are more resilient to the impacts. There's more genetic diversity, there's more opportunity for these species, for example, to actually adapt to a changing environment. But if we've got populations that are stressed, that are low numbers, then you just don't have that resilience. So it's not just that binary decision like, yes, we've got to stop overfishing. You got to look at the bigger consequences, and I think sometimes that gets lost in these discussions. People are very siloed, so it's like, well, we're only interested in the fish stock because that's our job, but no, it goes beyond that.
And this is basically your job now. You work for the World Resource Institute. What is the World Resource Institute doing specifically, also with a focus on the oceans then?
Yeah, so the World Resource Institute was formed in 1982 in Washington, D.C., and we're like a think tank. Rather, we don't do advocacy like a sort of a WWF, for example. And that doesn't mean we disagree with that approach. It's just we do things different. We work with evidence, and not saying WWF don't, but we work with evidence and present the evidence and inform decision making through that. So it's not sort of active lobbying or advocacy and things like that. So that kind of gives you an idea. And we work on areas such as the cities, energy, food, land and water, climate, economics, finance, and the ocean program. But we also have country offices around the world, for example, in Mexico, in China, Indonesia, several offices in Africa, and of course Europe. So we have we have that geographical program approach as well, so we can actually work specifically on the ground. So the ocean program, our key sort of approach here is working with an organization called the High Level Panel for a Sustainable Ocean Economy. It's often called the Ocean Panel. And that's 18 serving heads of state who have come together with a shared goal of having a sustainable blue economy. So that is a blue economy that is both it is protected, but it's productive, and there's equitable prosperity. And I think that's exactly how we need to look at working with the ocean. We can't just fence it off and say, we can't touch this, we've got to keep it pristine. It's just not feasible. And people depend on the ocean. But we can't either just go in there and take what we want. We have to protect and we have to sustainably manage activities. And we have to also ensure that, that, like I say, it's equitable prosperity as well. Local communities, local peoples are not being cut out of this prosperity. So that's the kind of the goal that the panel have, which is admirable. And they've worked producing evidence to say, how do we get from where we are now to this vision? And that's formed, the evidence based on that has formed a document called the Transformations Agenda, which sets out 14 strategic outcomes that we want to see by 2030 and 74 actions that actually say this is how we get to there. And that's all underpinned or overpinned by a key commitment, which is these 18 countries have committed to sustainably manage 100% of their national waters. So that's waters out to 200 nautical miles, unless there's another country in the way. Collectively, these 18 countries make up about 37.5% of the world's national waters. So this commitment alone is one of the largest conservation commitments out there. And it's not just about conservation, it's about protection. Yeah, we're looking at roughly 30% protection in this zone. So it's very much aligned to the 30 by 30 target. But that remaining 70% is not just ignored, it's sustainably managed. And we do that through tools called Sustainable Ocean Plans, or SOPs. And so 8 of the countries have already published their SOPs, which is brilliant, and the rest are working towards them. So that's the kind of the key thing the program works on. And our job is not exclusively, but a lot of the focus is on supporting the countries with making progress towards these 74 actions. We can't do all of it. They can't work on all 74 necessarily. So we've picked some priority areas with them. They've identified them, and they are obviously this 100% approach, ocean finance, because finance is absolutely essential. Ocean equity, which incorporates ocean literacy, as well as ensuring that local peoples, local communities, indigenous peoples are part of the conversation and decision making. Blue foods, which is really important, and ocean climate, and global ocean observations, which is the scientific sort of recording of data, which really is important because it feeds into modeling. So that's the kind of the sort of the structure of how we work and support these countries.
Okay. And how's the group of countries, or what's the composition of that group of countries? Obviously, they are all probably have a coastline, but is it a mix of different archetypes of countries?
Yeah, there was an original 14 countries. It's now 18, and the countries range from Canada, UK, France, Portugal, Norway, Chile. There's Namibia, Ghana, Kenya, and the Seychelles. From Africa, we have Japan, we have the UAE. From the Middle East, Australia, Palau, Fiji. So you can see there's Mexico. So there's a big range of countries. Like we have these sort of European countries, Northern Hemisphere countries. We also have African countries, small island developing states as well. So it's a really good mix, and there's a real nice complement in different sort of priorities, different experiences. And what's great is there's a lot of knowledge sharing between them and learning. So, like I say, we're now at 18 countries. The aim is to keep, it's not something we're sort of actively seeking new members. It's really sort of self-identification from ocean leaders who feel that they're working towards the shared goal.
And you mentioned 30 by 30 earlier, which is quite a well-known concept in the ocean space. So it's about establishing marine protected areas. Would you say this is the strongest tool in the toolbox?
I think it is a tool in the toolbox. I think it has a lot of contributions to many of the challenges. It offers refuge for species. You can have habitat. It can regrow, and it adds to the resilience that we mentioned before. I think if you do it on its own, if you just focused on 30% protection, you would not succeed in having the goals of a sustainable blue economy, because essentially you're ignoring the rest of the ocean, the sort of that 70%. So you've got to have the 30, definitely. 30 is, there's arguments that that's an arbitrary number. It could be 29, it could be 35, but you need to have this, these areas that are protected. But you do need to manage the rest as well. We understand you've got to have industry, but you've got to have it done properly. And I think this is where this 100% approach is so effective, because it works with the 30 by 30, but it also adds that layer of everything else must be managed. And that includes fisheries, offshore renewables, offshore energy, shipping, that kind of area as well. So we have a coherent, holistic approach to the ocean.
Because one of the resources that we didn't mention yet is coming up more and more also is deep sea mining. Is that part of the agenda for you?
Yeah, we the transformations agenda does talk about deep sea mining, and it's very much that it adopts a precautionary approach, that it doesn't say it should be prohibited. What it says, without question, it says there needs to be evidence there needs to be regulations in place, and it needs to be, if it's going to be done, it needs to be done in a way that the impact is managed. So that's very much our approach as well, that we're not saying it should be banned outright, because we feel that the evidence needs to be looked at, and I don't believe the evidence is there. I don't think we're ready for it. I think there's too many unknowns. So there's got to be a lot more science, and we've got to make informed decisions. And our role in this would be to work with others to provide that evidence to the decision makers, so they can make informed decisions. Again, we don't lobby, so we wouldn't say to country X, country Y, don't do this. We would say, this is the science. This is what it says. This is the consequences, the impacts. Now you have to make the right decision based on your country's priorities. Now that might not align with some other organizations, and I respect their positions, that they're against it. As a marine biologist, I have certain views, but also working through a sustainable ocean economy, if someone can demonstrate that an activity does not have irreparable harm, then, and it is needed for other parts of the world, then should it be allowed to take place? I think that's the discussion. But if it can't be, and it's going to be highly impactful and it will never recover, then I think the evidence is clear.
I'm curious, because I could imagine as a marine biologist that sometimes that this can be quite tough to form an opinion. How do you go about this?
Well, I think many marine biologists are sort of inspired by, certainly of my generation and older, is by Jacques Cousteau. That's when we really first kind of saw people going underwater and seeing the beauty of it. And so he's quite, a bit of a hero in terms of what he did and kind of inspiration. And one of the things he said was, we can't treat the sea like a museum. We have to farm it. And I like to consider he wasn't just talking about aquaculture, he was talking about utilizing the ocean. And it's essential that we do. I think what makes it work for me is we've got to do it properly. It has to be done in a way that isn't going to cause irreparable harm. And we have these areas that are untouched and left alone. So it very much, this 100% approach very much aligns with my own sort of personal philosophy. We can't just fence off the oceans and say, right, we can't touch this, it's got to be pristine, because it's just not realistic. But we can do it in a way that is sustainable, is responsible, and it doesn't leave it, we leave it for future generations in a way that they can enjoy the benefits of the ocean.
And there's a couple of platforms out there like Netflix that every now and then they bring this documentary which changes people's minds. So many people say, I'm never going to eat fish again after seeing a specific documentary. Or now also with the new Our Ocean movie by David Attenborough, when they first filmed this bottom trawling, right? This touches people's hearts and changes the way how people think about it. At the same time, it shows one side of the coin, and it shows this one side of the coin so drastically that there's almost no space to look at the other direction of the coin. So, for example, I visited a fisherman in Pondicherry in India. He's a small scale fisherman. He's providing for himself and his family, and also feeds a bit into the local market. And he did bottom trawl. What do we say to these small scale fishers? Are they not allowed to do this anymore? How do we balance this economic output versus these obviously harmful practices?
Yeah, and I think this is the nuance, because there is a campaign to ban bottom trawling in protected areas, and I think that's absolutely sensible. You know, if you have a protected area and bottom trawling, which is high impact, now notice I say high impact, not necessarily highly destructive, because it does depend on what you're trawling over, but it is going to be high impact regardless. Then it shouldn't be allowed in protected areas. And I don't think that's an argument that many people, if anyone, is actually arguing against. I think the messaging did get a bit confused when the film came out. It was like ban bottom trawling, full stop. And it's like, well, I don't think that's what's being said here. I think what's being said is it should be banned in protected areas. For those people who want it banned outright, then you've got to put the question to them and say, well, what about those people that are actually reliant on it? And what about those fish that can't really be caught in any other particular way? Or what about in areas that have got really high currents and nothing sort of three-dimensional is growing? And is it really having that much of a negative impact? Is having an impact? Is having a negative impact? Or even, are there acceptable footprints for food production? Fisheries are often held to such a high bar compared to everything else. It's like, are we being realistic here? Can we accept that there is going to be an impact, there is going to be a negative impact, but what is acceptable and what is not acceptable? And I think that's the discussion. But that's very nuanced, and that doesn't sell papers or get headlines. What gets headlines is ban this form of gear. Now, there are certain forms of gear that should be banned, like poisoning and explosives. There's just absolutely no justification for that. That should be outlawed. And we had the drifting gill nets that were banned on the high seas. And yeah, you can understand that. And they're all alternatives to fish. But I think on the issue of like trawling, I think it is more nuanced. There should be a shift. We could shift as much as we can to lower impact forms of fishing. I think that's sensible. But again, you need to be very clear how we're going to make up the reduction in efficiency. A lot of this is driven by efficiencies of catch. If we can do that, then yeah, that's thing. This is where we as consumers have an opportunity to say, if we don't want to buy trawled fish, then we have an opportunity as consumers to say to the market, we don't want to buy that, we want to buy this instead. But that doesn't happen. In fact, when these programs come out, there's often a spike in sales of seafood, because it actually gets people thinking about it. It's like, oh, fish. So we don't
Stimulates them to thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's not often this link. You get a lot of news, a lot of awareness of the issue, which I think is good, but sometimes the messaging and the focus gets lost, and the wrong challenge is highlighted. But that being said, these are Seaspiracy, Ocean, very popular. Well filmed. I don't necessarily particularly Seaspiracy. There's a lot in there I disagree with. It came from a vegan agenda, which is absolutely respect that view. But that you've got to be aware of where it's coming from.
Yeah, I remember in the movie, one of the big targets was MSC as a sustainability label, and we don't have to get into the details there, but would you say that MSC is one of those examples on how to manage the remaining 70%? Because in my understanding, MPAs are only truly marine protected areas if it's no catch zones, no bottom trawling, like you really leave this ecosystem alone. No fishing, no activity, maybe a bit of diving, no touching. Is that the right lens to look at this?
I would see this is another example of the nuance. So what you've just described is a no-take zone. So that's, you have an area that you just don't do any activity in it. But a marine protected area is protecting a feature or a habitat or some and what the way it's described is that doesn't prohibit all activity, only the activities that will have a negative impact on that feature. So the question I would put to you is, if there was a coral reef in this area and we put a box around it and said, this is a marine protected area. So you don't want to trawl in that. Absolutely get that, or dredge, because that will have a direct impact. But should we ban line fishing that fishes, maybe a meter depth? Should we prevent pelagic trawls that don't touch the seabed? So that's a question for the managers. It's like, well, no, if it doesn't have an impact on the habitat that we're protecting, then why would we do it? Why would we prohibit it? If we just want to say this area is out of bounds for all activity, then that is a subset of a marine protected area called a no-take zone. So that's one question. And the Marine Stewardship Council, and I'm a member of the Marine Stewardship Council Stakeholder Advisory Committee. So I'm not involved in the governance structures at all. It's a stakeholder advisory role. And I've been very clear with the MSC. I think the MSC is very good. Is it perfect? No. I think it is very robust. I think it is one of the best certification schemes. I know some people don't like it. I think some of the reasons people don't like it are maybe not as transparent as they make out. But can it be improved? Yep. And the team works very hard to do that. They try to take into account all the different views. But what it does do is it does offer you a level of assurance. And I think that's particularly useful for retail. They can say, we don't have the ability to go and check all these fisheries. And this standard has been done. The MSC doesn't certify themselves. They just hold the standard. It's done by independent bodies. So yes, I think it can add a level of assurance. And there's other standards out there as well, of course. But I think they do add to it. But the problem is, it just takes one bad example, and then people think the whole thing is corrupt or greenwashing. And I think that's very unfair. And I think if people were to look into it in more detail, they would see that that's not the case. But the problem is, people don't have time to look into it. I mean, I don't really understand how terrestrial protein standards work. No. So, I do appreciate that it is not as easy as that.
No. And then at the same time, I think very, very, very few consumers know how the ocean works, which brings us again to this topic of ocean literacy, right? And why it's important. Because I think on land, right, people now have an understanding maybe of the different farming methods, specifically when it comes to also how animals are held. And in eggs, there's now a very clear differentiation. And it's easy for the consumer to make a decision, okay, I do want free range. And if I'm buying free range, in probably 99% of the cases, I am getting free range. For the ocean, that's still a bit more difficult, because most people probably think, okay, there's a fish, it's swimming, there might be a net, or somebody's line fishing that fish and I'm eating it, and that's it. But all this knowledge that sits in there and how it affects ecosystems is less clear to the consumer, most likely.
Oh, absolutely. It's such a difficult subject. I mean, you mentioned eggs, and that's a great example. I mean, I'm no expert, but there's barn eggs, free range eggs, and I understand that there's maybe some gray area where some birds have some space, and I don't know all the details. And that's exactly why I rely on. I am trusting the retailers to do that thinking for me. It's called choice editing. So that's an example there. Let's take an animal, pork, for example. Now, it's there's the factory farming, and there's the whole spectrum of they have lots of space and they're outside and all that. Again, I don't know the details about that, so I'm very well. I don't actually. I'm pescatarian, but if I was choosing it for someone else, I would rely on the supermarket to do that thinking for me. But with seafood, oh my goodness, we're not just talking about pork. We're talking about 2,600 different commercially popular species, and if that's, and there's a tail that goes down several more. There's different ways of capturing. So you've got the same species caught in different methods. which they all have slightly different impacts. And then you have farmed versions as well. How do I know whether is this fish farmed? I don't know anything about fish. So which is what is it? And is farming all bad? And
Hmm.
the number of challenges is incredible. It's like this one species might be sustainable in terms of stock numbers. There's tons of it, for example. But what I don't know is that when it's caught in this particular method, it's actually wiping out this other species. I don't know that. So how do I make it? I don't know anything about it. How do I make a challenge? And some NGOs have produced fish lists, which are, I think they're useful if you're really into it. But how many people are actually going to go to a supermarket with the fish list?
No.
Because it doesn't always give you the information on the pack. It maybe just says this is from FAO Area 52. Brilliant. How was it caught? It doesn't say. It just says where it's from. So generally, if the product says how it was caught, it means they're selling something. There's the line caught. You advertise sort of the better forms. So it's really difficult, and you are relying on the supermarkets to, and I think some of them do a great job. They do a lot of due diligence on it, and they make the choices for you. So you go into their store, and you can kind of be assured that the worst, certainly at least the worst stuff is not on sale. But it's very, very difficult. Just seafood on its own.
Yeah, and then as a consumer, you also don't know how important is a specific fish for an ecosystem, right? And
Absolutely.
how much under stress was that ecosystem and all that. So, and that brings me to another topic, right? You speak to heads of state on the ocean, and presumably maybe they are 5% more educated on the oceans than a standard consumer. What are the biggest roadblocks that you encounter when you speak with head of states on informing their ocean roadmap, so to say?
I think it's just the sheer volume of things that they have to deal with. The ocean is just one tiny part of their portfolio. They're responsible for everything. And so when you do get some heads of state, President Whips of Palau is a great example. Palau is obviously a small island development state, also known as a large ocean state. It's surrounded by ocean. He is incredibly bought into the ocean and the importance of it because it has such a huge impact on Palau. As cultural and economical. In fact, he was recently the first head of state ever to be interviewed underwater there at Aquilon, which was fantastic. So he's really bought into it. So he's someone who is he's involved. But then have other heads of state who have maybe got a much wider sort of remit, much bigger challenges, and it is more difficult. But the good thing is all these the Ocean Panel heads of state are all committed to this, and so whilst they may not necessarily be directly involved in every conversation, we do get like communiques, for example, that go out once a year that are signed by the head at the head of state level. So we know that the head of state has seen and signed off on the content of that, and that gives you a great deal of confidence that this is an important matter, it's an important issue, and they have representatives, that represent them in the meetings we have, who are there speaking on their behalf. So that's really important as well. So we have the buy-in of these countries to actually take these actions. And one of the things we're working with them on, we have a 26 to 30 work plan, which identifies these priority areas I mentioned earlier. And so it sets out what we all collectively want to achieve. Now, there's going to be other areas that some countries are interested in as well, and that's fab. But these are the ones that all 18 have agreed are the priorities. And what we do each year as well, we have an annual plan that goes into even more detail, more granularity, that says this is what you are going to do, and this is what we at WRI are going to do to support you achieving that. So it's a really, rather than just be this nebulous, yes, we're going to work on the ocean, it's right, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And each of these little building blocks will collectively build our sort of tower towards that vision.
We go into that a bit more detailed because I wonder how easy or difficult that is. I want to make one example. Often I have that bias myself, right? We do a lot of work in the Global South in my day job when I'm not doing this podcast. And there are elements that are really difficult to understand if you grow up in a specific culture and then if you visit another one. And one of those topics is really how poverty is driving short-term decision making in specific areas. For example, we got active in a community in Indonesia where people use plastic waste to build the foundation of their house in a river. And obviously, the river would take away the plastic and bring it back into the ocean. So we said, okay, we're going to give you limestone to build the foundation, but you keep the plastic out of the river. And they said, okay, cool. We brought the limestone. The next day, they sold the limestone because they wanted to make money. The plastic stayed in the river, and the example failed. Now, you can't judge them for that because
Yeah.
there's no monthly paycheck. People do live from hand to mouth, and finding the right interventions there is really difficult. And now if I look at the mix of countries that you have in the coalition, or not coalition, but in let's say the ocean panel, how does the work that needs to be done in the UK compare to that, for example, of Palau? It must be completely different, huh?
Yeah, and I think this is why mentioned the transformations agenda that has 74 priority actions in it. Some of these actions are just not going to be applicable everywhere. And we understand that. So there's absolutely no commitment on the countries to deliver all 74 for a couple of reasons. Number one, not every country's got mangroves, so that example wouldn't work everywhere. But secondly, some of the countries in the global south have said, we support all of these, but we can't deliver them all in the time frame we're talking about because we just don't have the capacity, the resources, the expertise. And that's totally understandable. And the panel was really clear that these 74 actions are voluntary commitments, because that way we could sign them all off and say, these are important, because this document is not meant to be just for these 18 countries. It's meant to be adopted by anyone else who, this has gone through such a big process and sign off. So hopefully the credibility of it is high. So another country can come, this is actually what we want to do. So that's one way we do it. It's doing that kind of, we're not holding people to the same level. So some countries have come out and said, well, we're going to work towards 74 because that's what we want to do. Others not. This is not a priority for us ever or at this time. And so we have to respect that. The second one is when we do these work plans, it is consensus. So it's like, what is a priority for everyone? And that's where we sort of drill down and everyone can say, yes, this is something we're interested in doing. And we can contribute to it and we can work towards it. So, this work plan was signed off at the very highest level as well. So that gives us a filter of these collective areas we can work on. And like I say, it doesn't mean there's other areas that we're ignoring. If a country comes to us and we have funding to deliver something, and it's only going to benefit one country, that's still very important, very impactful. But obviously the priority is to do work with everyone. And the third one is a lot of the issues are driven by resources, and so ocean finance is incredibly important as well. It's working to secure that level of investment into ocean work. And your example is really important because maybe we need another approach is to look at, right, we know what we want to do. We want to have sustainable ocean economy, and we know what we want to achieve and how we want to do that. We've talked about the three sort of the protect, produce, and equitable prosperity. And if we know how to deliver that, then maybe one solution is you get investment into a project for producing the results. So rather than we're going to throw the money at you, and I've been to, and I'm not saying that's what happened with the limestone example, but I've had a great workshop we did last year when people were saying money is not necessarily a problem. Getting that initial $1 million or $50,000, that's not actually what's needed. What's needed is that support, the education, and investment, in long-term investment. And that really opened my eyes to it as well. And it's like, we know where we got to go. If we can get people, and this is where the ocean literacy comes in, we get them to understand why it's going to benefit them in the long run. And I think that's really important. It's the people angle. Conservation is really important, but if we lead with conservation, I think sometimes we miss that messaging. It's like, no, we're doing this for you, but you do need to conserve this area, or we do need to protect this ecosystem because ultimately you are dependent on it. But everything is being done to assist you in this way. So I think that's how to do it.
Yeah, and I think there's almost like this little awakening in the entire, let's call it sustainability bubble, that this is probably the better narrative, right? Away from this, we have to save the ocean, we have to save the forest, or animals work still pretty well. Humans are, at least if it's big mammals, we can empathize with them, maybe even more so than with other humans. But this understanding that we can only live a healthy life if our surroundings are healthy, this more egocentric view almost is more beneficial than this altruistic. At least it seems like in the current cultural setting, and that's the shift that I've been observing from the early 2000s to where we are now, or the early 2020s to where we are now throughout COVID. It's more this self-centered view, at least here, let's say in Germany and the more developed nations, maybe also politically driven, but that's another topic.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And there was a report that came out yesterday on philanthropic funding in the ocean space over the last decade. And it was really interesting. You can see where the trends are. You know, there's a lot of funding towards climate impacts and climate mitigations, understandable. There was a small increase in funding towards sustainable fishing, but within that small increase, nearly half was for small scale fishing. So again, it's people focused. But the conservation one was very static compared with the growth elsewhere. And I think you're right. It's obviously important. We all know that, but I think it's the framing of it, because we are in a changed geopolitical landscape. And it seems to be getting, the pace of change seems to be quicker. And if you lead with conservation, I just don't think the decision makers are going to be that receptive. But if you lead with people, the economy, and by the way, you need to do this to make it work, then it's a completely different conversation, even if the work itself is identical.
Yeah. I mean, you know, if every fisherman, and probably they understand that better than me or a lot of other people out there, if they understand that this is managed sustainably, they can continuously feed their family and also the market. But if everything is depleted, then it's going to get very difficult, right? So if the river starts to become clean, because not all rubbish and chemicals and whatever goes into the river and runs off and kills the fish downstream, that probably has a bigger effect than if you say, it's like, oh, look at the ecosystem suffering. So it's quite interesting. If we have a bit more time, maybe we can do a bit of an ocean literacy crash course if you don't mind. So there's two topics that I want to cover. On the one side, all the things that the ocean is doing to us, and then we discussed MPAs very quickly as one of the tools in the toolbox. I'd be curious to hear a couple more if we can, but maybe and if it's a question that you can't answer, let me know. But how does the ocean actually produce the oxygen for us? Because everybody knows trees, they absorb CO2 and basically emit what we need to breathe. That's my amateur view, having 2 years of biology in high school, and that's it. How does it work in the ocean?
It's the same way with photosynthesis. So algae, microalgae and macroalgae as well. So lots of phytoplankton in the ocean, photosynthesizing. So it's exactly the same process, but it's just on such a huge scale, because the ocean, of course, is 70% of the world's surface.
And then because there's this term carbon pump, I think, for the ocean. What is it? How does it work?
Yeah, so that's the carbon cycle in the ocean. So that's I mean, good example here is one of an example of a carbon pump is the dead whales. So it's the actual a whale drop, it's called. So that, you know, whales are eating things, carbon sink themselves, and when they die, they firstly they float because of the gases, and then they the gases are expelled, or the chunks taken out of them by a shark or something, and then it sinks to the bottom, and that takes the carbon with it. So that's part of the sort of the carbon pump. It's not something I've sort of studied in depth, as more of an oceanography thing than a sort of a marine biology example. But essentially, it's these sort of nutrient cycles or chemical cycles that are happening every day, and they have just a huge contribution to our survivability. And the same thing happens on well, similar kind of cycles happen on land as well.
Hmm. Okay. The health aspect that you mentioned,
Mm.
I actually moved my family to Portugal now for the winter because we can't stand the cold, long, violent winters. So I'm 5 kilometers away from the ocean. Uh, what did you find in that report? Is there a clue why people that live by the ocean live longer?
Yeah, there's not one factor. I think there's lots of different factors
Hmm.
that are involved in it. I mean, there's also one of the questions, of course, is well, rich people live by the coast because they can afford it, so they have better food and healthcare and standards of living, and that's probably a factor. But what was interesting was those, say, people who live by rivers and lakes, which are often in a similar kind of bracket.
Hmm.
We didn't see that increase either. So there's definitely something, and there is one of the things that is the motion of the waves, Heraclean motion, I think, or something like that. That is meant to be extremely. We're very receptive to that in our brain, and it sort of releases endorphins or similar. And that's meant to be a really sort of a nice thing for us, and that's potentially got health benefits. I don't know what they are. I think it's still emerging.
Yeah.
But it is fascinating, and you just the number of people you speak to go, yeah, I love going to the ocean, just standing there looking at the sea. There's just something about it, and so I think that's how we've got to connect. It's that emotional connection, and I think that is the key to ocean literacy, is connecting emotionally. We can produce lots of facts, and I can produce so many facts and give you facts that why the ocean's important.
Hmm.
But it's only going to work if it connects to you emotionally, and I think that's why things like enigmatic animals, like everyone, whaling is such an issue that hardly anyone is supportive of whaling, because there is that emotional connection to these beautiful creatures. There's no economics involved. People can say, well, actually, we can harvest whales sustainably, some species. No one cares.
No.
That's not what they're
Not.
exactly. We care about the whales. It doesn't matter if you can do it. And maybe there's some exceptions when people from like Inuits and people who do it culturally. People are like, well, that doesn't mean we're not incorporating that because they take one a season or something like that. But yeah, so I think that's the key. It's that emotion.
No. And it seems to be really baked into our DNA. My daughter is 20 months, so she can speak a little bit. But when I took her to the beach, the first thing she does is she runs towards the ocean. And all she wants to do is have a little feet stand at the place where the ocean meets the sand and the waves roll in and just have the water play around her feet. And she could do that all day. Like, makes her so happy, which makes me happy. And maybe that's what's driving longevity. But
it could be, but I mean, one book I would absolutely recommend people read, even if you consider it a work of fiction or you consider it complete fact. It's called The Aquatic Ape Hypothesis by Elaine Morgan.
Okay.
And she postulates that we went through a evolutionary phase in the water, and that's one of the reasons why we have unlike other primates, we don't have a lot of body hair. Why we have sort of a thin layer of blubber over us. The way the hair that we do have on our body is like designed to sort of drip water off. Why our brain is essentially long chain omega-3 acids, which from shellfish. So it's a really interesting book. I found it fascinating, and it's like I say, there's a lot of people who question it or criticize it. That's fine. It's a good read.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And so now we covered some of the aspects. As a marine biologist, if you could take every human on Earth diving, what are the 2 places you would take them to really get them interested in, or to make them want to study the ocean a bit more? Maybe one beautiful place and one where you say is like, this is so devastating that once you see that, you want to help.
I mean, obviously I think one answer is the Great Barrier Reef. And I think that could probably do two things there. One is to show the sheer diversity of life there and the beauty, but also show the impacts of coral bleaching. And, that is, I think that's an emotive opportunity to people to see this is what it is, and this is what it looks like when coral bleaches, and, everything just dies, and it's awful. But I would also take people to Monterey Bay. It's a slightly different thing. And again, there's a story there. Monterey was famous for the sardine fisheries there. But there was also the sea otters, who were beautiful little things. And they were hunted for their pelts and nearly wiped them out. And one of the things that the sea otters eat are sea urchins. And the sea urchins then exploded because there was no sea otters. And one of the things they eat is kelp. And they eat the holdfast of the kelp. And Monterey Bay is full of kelp forests. And because the sea urchins were just exploded, they ate the kelp holdfast, the kelp, and everything died. And then the fishery collapsed. And this was the whole industry. And it just goes to show one consequence went through. Then the sea otters, we found a population in California. They reintroduced, they spread a bit, they're protected, and now we're getting to that position where there's kelp forest back. I think seeing that and hearing the tales of what happened would be something as well to show. Yeah, but we didn't touch the kelp. We didn't touch the sardines. No, but you touched the sea otters. They're all connected. And I think that's a wonderful story. There again, there's a scientist, Steve Palumbo, who's written a great book about that whole episode, which is that just shows you the example. And there is hope, there is recovery.
And I think that's one of the stories where it went well. When we talk about the tools that you have in your toolbox, are there any other stories that come to mind where you say it's like, this is where an intervention worked really well, something that might work in other parts of the world, something that gives you hope?
Yeah, in Shetland, the group of small islands at the very sort of north, get to North Scotland and keep going. They used a tool called a several order, which is it's a fisheries tool it's for shellfish, and what it does is it severs the right to people who are not within the order to fish for shellfish. And what they used it's normally used in some very small areas. So it's like, I'm going to have a lease for 20 years to work on the shellfish in this, and you apply to government and get one. Very old piece of legislation, but from 1880, but it works. And they took a different approach, and they had the whole of the Shetland Islands become a several order for the shellfish. So several species of shellfish. And the fishermen who were based there were all part of it. So now they have security of tenure. It's like, right, this is our fishery now. And the fishermen manage it with the council, I think it is there. And they can say, actually, this is benefiting me. And so they're some of the strongest managers, because they can see, it's like, right, I know exactly what I get. They get my competitors get this, I get this. It's all going to benefit us. So I think this kind of local management, you see huge changes, because you don't get that race to the bottom where I've got to get this, because if I don't, they'll get that. They'll take it and they'll win. It's like, no, we're all going to win, but we've all got to do it properly. And then this kind of approach is, again, it's not rocket science, but it just needs doing. And when it's done properly, then it's really successful and everyone wins. And I think that's the key point, is getting to that realization that, we can all win. One example where it's not happening is the Northeast Atlantic in the mackerel, herring and blue whiting fisheries. Some of the best science in the world. We know what the quota needs to be, and the countries who are fishing these cannot agree how to share the quota. So it's like having a cake and everyone says, right, I want a bigger slice than you're offering. And so that's not going to work. We can't all have a bigger slice. But they're doing it. And so what's happening is they're overfishing this fishery, which is really difficult to overfish, but they're doing it. And the latest data for the mackerel was that there was a 70% cut needed because they've overfished it. Wow.
Then at some point there's nothing left, and
because they can't agree how to share it.
And are there tipping points where a fishery just cannot recover anymore?
There are. It would greatly depend on the species. It would
Yeah.
depend on the conditions. But a good example, the well quoted example is in the northeast of the US, the cod
Mm.
fishery there. That collapsed to such a level that it's just not recovering.
Mm.
There's still cod there, of course, but it's just not. There's not enough there now to cover. And also, it's some of the prey it was preying on, the juvenile cod, has now exploded, and it's now competing with the juvenile cod, and so that's another factor. So it's an ecosystem consequence of our impact, and so that's a real worry when it gets down to a certain level. And it's not like an arbitrary. I can't give you a figure,
No.
but once it gets to a particular level, then it might never come back. Certainly not in the level it was before, because
No.
the landscape has changed, or the seascape has changed.
No. Is there a tip that you can give people that like to eat fish? How should they go about it? Is that even possible to make
Yeah.
an all-encompassing claim?
Yeah, I think that there is. I mean, there's there's one thing I can say that I know I wouldn't get pushback on from anyone, which is farmed, non-fed bivalves. So that's mussels, oysters, clams, scallops. So if it's farmed and it's non-fed, which they aren't, so they get their, you're not adding feed to that. They are the most sustainable source of long-chain omega-3 acids. You can pretty much eat them, and your impact on the ocean will be minimal. These are good for you. They're healthy. That even the way of harvest them doesn't really have a negative impact, particularly for line-reared shellfish. That is the kind of the bulletproof advice.
Are there any tools that can help you inform this? Anything that you would recommend?
Yeah, it depends where you are. The Seafood Watch tool from Monterey Bay Aquarium is very good, and a lot of the retailers use it themselves, so you don't have to go in with a card. And actually, you go to retail and it tells you what this is green, this is orange. Green means buy, orange means it's okay. Think twice. It's got improvements to make. Generally, going to a retailer, a good retailer, they do a lot of the choice editing for you. I wouldn't say it's perfect. There will be challenges, but that's pretty good. But the best thing you can do is ask questions and go in and say, where was this caught? They probably won't be able to tell you, but if enough people do that, then that message gets through. But just keep asking the questions.
Okay. And I just have to open this real quick before we end the conversation. You're working with 18 nations. If you look at how multilateralism works lately, it doesn't look very promising. Do you feel this is different if you have such a targeted focus on something where the nations actually agree on?
I think this year has seen good and bad multilateralism in the ocean space. We've seen the High Seas Treaty, or the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Agreements, that's BBNJ. That was ratified by over 60 countries. I think we're now at 70 odd. So that's now gone into the next phase. We shall set up a committee, the COP, BBNJ COP. That's brilliant. That's so good. And so the next, obviously, that's not done it yet. We've got to take it forward, but that was a brilliant thing that happened. We've seen the WTO agreement on harmful subsidies, Fish 1, so that's the first part, come through as well. That's great. Took 20 years to get to it, but we did it. Now we've got to work on Fish 2, which is needed as well. So that's two really good things.
What do they do?
So harmful subsidies this is where taxpayers' money is given to fisheries who are overfishing, for example. So what the Fish 1 does is it's stopping subsidies going to fisheries that are overfished. So you can't, if you're fishing overfished stock, you can't get subsidies for that. Fish 2 looks at actually the drivers were overfishing and illegal, so it goes into a bit more detail. But this is great. This is one of the challenges we've got with fish. So good news. The bad, the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, had spent ages on a net zero framework with the support of the shipping sector, that was looking at sort of helping them transition towards net zero fuels. So great, loads of countries supporting it, finally getting everyone together. The US and Saudi and maybe a couple of other petrostates actively, I mean, and I'm talking like really seriously, lobbied countries to vote against this. Trump came out and said it was a scam and it was a tax, and they were going to do. He was going to do X, Y, and Z to countries who
Should call
support.
it a tariff, and maybe it works.
Yeah, I mean, it really disappointing. In the end, because it was a deadlock. There was a vote to postpone it for a year, and the vote was carried by only 8 countries. So, there was we just needed to sort of shift 5 countries, and it would have gone through. So that is really disappointing. That's an example of, the situation we're in, where multilateralism is being sort of shunned.
Is there a question that I should have asked that I didn't ask you? Any topic that deserves more coverage that we didn't discuss?
I think one is the finance. I think, and there's 17 sustainable development goals that the UN have organized, and number 14 is life under the water. That receives less than 0.1% of all the SDG funding, despite having 70% of the planet's resurface.
And providing all these free services to us, basically.
Yeah. And another fact that came out of this report that came out yesterday on funding, 0.1% of all philanthropic funding goes towards the ocean.
That is outrageous.
Yeah.
So we should take all the billionaires diving, or
yeah, it's an absolute crisis, because resourcing is needed to make these things happen. There's a lot of people out there. We know what we got to do. It's very clear. We've got people ready to do it because of all the benefits, but we just can't make it happen because it does need resourcing. We can't just do these things. Require a transition.
You have all the capital in the world. What would you change?
Wow. I think she would. Yeah, it would need to. I mean, it would support by funding positive action. So we know what we've got to do. And if you go to a country and say, look, it's in your benefit to do this, they'll probably agree and say, yeah, we know, but we just can't afford it. Right, we'll pay for it. The Pacific Islands, so the Pacific Blue Continent, all these islands, their exclusive economic zones are huge. It's a small island, 200 nautical miles all the way around it. Imagine loads of islands. It's a huge area. They received significant funding from the Bezos Earth Fund to do a couple of things, one of which is sustainably manage 100% of their ocean area. These countries are, they know the benefits of doing this. They understand it, and it's like, right, we want to do it, but where's the funding? Here's the funding. Right, we'll do it. So there is the willingness.
They do know.
That's the next thing, is going to be actually working on potentially a tool like a sustainable ocean plan for each of the countries to actually put into practice this management, and it will incorporate these 30% as well. So it's very similar to the work we're doing on it. So it's this new approach which is becoming more popular, which is this sustainable ocean planning and management. So it's actually setting out this is how we're going to deliver this.
So that includes marine protected areas.
That's right.
Stewardship of fisheries, mining, offshore energy.
Yeah, depending on the activities that you wish to do as a country. Because it's in your national waters.
No.
You don't need anyone else's permission to do it. It's like it's my waters. This is what we're going to do, but we're going to do it in this way that it's done properly.
It would be great to see similar competition around who can save the oceans compared to who can touch down on Mars first.
Absolutely. It's but there's a quote: the people know more about the surface of the moon than the surface of the ocean, and it's because there's no funding.
No, right now that people realize that there's some precious metals down there, maybe soon we will know a whole lot more. For maybe the wrong reasons, but who knows?
Yeah, that's one of the tragedies. It's driven by exploitation and extraction.
Great. So I hope we can fix that. Personally, this conversation did give me a lot of hope. Thanks a lot for all the work that you do. And thanks so much for your time today.
You're welcome. Thank you very much indeed for having me.
Thanks, Tom. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube and our Instagram.
Where the ocean meets.